Hello there, I'm Laura Donkers. I'm an ecological artist, and my approach to making art is all about getting out into nature as a way to develop my perspective and how I observe, recognize, and connect with the environment, drawing from actual experience to develop my skills through the process of sensing and seeing. This approach to art creation presents the world as something vibrant and alive, and vital to understanding ourselves as part of this living world. I have an expanded drawing practice that extends how drawing might be thought about and translates experiences into forms that help engage and deepen understanding of my surroundings. This is apparent in how I make marks, invent new materials and supports, and work at different scales and in all sorts of places to gather primary data that conveys moments of connection that present the reality of the environment I'm in and the communities who dwell there. And by that I mean non-humans too. This requires me to settle into a place over a period of time so I can observe and listen to all the living entities that intersect with that particular place and its conditions. This puts me in a real space of encounter with the lives, experiences, knowledges, and concerns of others. To illustrate this, I want to show you a short section from a video work, Land Radius, that I produced in 2014. I made Land Radius as a durational video work to capture the annual emergence of sea pinks on a salt marsh near my home on the Isle of North Uist in the Outer Hebrides. Sea pinks are an extraordinary little perennial plant producing pink flowers that flourish in the challenging salt marsh environment and survive submersion by the sea. I had witnessed this phenomenon taking place each June for around 25 years. That these delicate flowers could exist at all in such a challenging location fascinated me, but also visually transformed an otherwise unremarkable piece of common Hebridean land. I attached a trail camera to a post to ensure I could record the process from a fixed position over the course of 60 days, aiming to capture the emergence of the sea pinks, as well as the flooding of the land from the adjacent sea loch. I sought to capture the visuality of the rising water by anchoring a 10-meter diameter ring of blue water pipe that would be the focus of the video, as it would start to float as the tide came in. I knew also that deer frequented this area and contrived to lay the pipe across their tracks so that they would come to feature in the video too. The blue ring created a drawing in the land and a focus for the camera to record 1-minute-long video sequences at several fixed times a day. As expected, over the 60 days, the sea pinks emerged, giving a spectacular show. The deer presence turned out to be much greater than I had expected, and charmingly animated the scenes, along with many other species who were picked up by the camera's sensor, such as geese and otters. The land, however, only ever flooded on 2 occasions in this period of filming. I felt a little underwhelmed and didn't understand why this was. I had taken it for granted that the tide rose each day and caused the land to flood, but the video evidence challenged this assumption, and I began to realize that there was clearly something else going on that I knew very little about. I knew nothing about the lunar cycles causing the tides to rise higher at certain times of the month, but I now wanted to find out more. I went on to have discussions with many people who could tell me about what was happening on this tiny scrap of land. Much of those discussions were with crofters who wanted to talk about the impact of the deer numbers and invasions of geese on their grazing. A bird warden explained about the rising geese numbers and why there was indeed a need for culling. And in the end, it was a ferryman who could best describe to me why the land only flooded once a month. He spoke about the sea in a way I had never heard before. He described how the shape of the land affected the height of the tide and the currents, and how the vast seas he stepped onto for his day job were moved by the mysteries of gravity and the lunar cycles. His ability to convey his physical understanding was extraordinary to experience, yet it came from his ordinary, daily lived physical knowledge of working on that body of water. The final work was exhibited as a collection of 9 one-hour Blu-ray videos that were presented over the course of a 9-day exhibition, accompanied by an audio recording of the testimonies of local people presenting their perspectives on that piece of land. This was a marvelous experience that has stayed with me and informed a growing body of work around the importance of local knowledge and how those knowledges might be used as methods to engage wider societal understanding of ecology and the ecological crisis. So that's it. Thanks very much for listening.
Spring tides to neap tides, and then to spring tides and neap tides. And then as the Earth travels round the Sun, because the Earth goes a wee bit closer or a wee bit further away, that effect changes as well. So it's changing over the. So there's lots of. It's very difficult to predict, and I think that all the tide tables and everything, they're really done from measurements and things like that, and they know in a certain area how it's been, they'll know how it will be. So that affects why the water moves, why it moves at different rate.
All the time,
now, but what has a bigger effect
the better
on our
land,
tides, the rise and
the
fall
land
of
that's
our
been improved.
tides
And I
is
suppose it's like
mainly
the grass is always
the
greener, isn't it? You know,
the
they
shape
want to
of the
come in.
bathymetry, the shape of the shore,
the deer going through a
below
bad winter,
seawater,
you know,
seabed,
they're always out in the hill. So then, when this fresh grass grows,
out in the middle of the ocean,
condition up,
Right.
and especially the
rise
stags.
and
The
fall of the
stags
sea
are
level is
trying to
probably only a couple
grow
of feet.
big, and
It doesn't move much. But
also they cast their
because that-
antlers, and then the antlers grow back
imagine a
again.
very deep ocean,
And the antler is
and
it's
it
one of
moves
the
up a wee
fastest
bit.
growing.
It's just increased its kind of
Is it
volume.
bones or whatever in the animal
Up
kingdom?
here.
I think the antler will grow about an inch a day.
But then when you get to the shore,
So you can see what the body requirements for that animal are. You know, for to grow that. You know, so they need minerals, and the ewes here, I reckon that's how some of the stags have very good heads. You know, because of the different mineral sort of that they can get. They can get the shore, you know, and the seaweed.
Right.
And then obviously they're lacking sort of they need green grass to try and get their body condition up. And the better the stag, the better the antler, and then the bigger the antler, the better group of hinds that he can have. So it's nature, isn't it?
Right.
You know, so he's trying to get as big as he can to try and, you know, just to so then obviously then during the rutting then they then fight, and then obviously the biggest stag will have the biggest group of hinds, and then he looks after them. So that's actually why the deer come in here, you know, to try. It's nature, isn't it? So
Yeah, they're
and
not
then-
daft.
No. So we're just trying to make our own life here too. So I feel sort of guilty shooting them, but then you have then the implications then with the tick problem, because with all our cattle and sheep we can treat them for tick and other parasites and worms and whatever. But the deer, you know, they're completely wild, and when they come in, they're dropping ticks onto this fresh pasture, and then that's changing.
So the structure of my talk is based on the three verities as described by Robert Adams, a contemporary photographer and writer. These are geography, autobiography, and metaphor. I have selected three projects made in three places, Liverpool, Exmouth, and Venice. All have very different tidal characteristics. As Adams says of these verities, geography is, if taken alone, sometimes boring. Autobiography is frequently trivial, and metaphor can be dubious. I'll try and bear these in mind. So slide one is Liverpool, as we said. So I was born near Liverpool. The arrow marks the spot. Suburbia by the sea, an idyllic setting. The tip of the peninsula is bound by the rivers Dee and Mersey. We face the Irish Sea. As the tide retreated, a vast space opened up, a playground of shifting sand and water. As kids, we roamed freely, and at times we had to literally run back to the land when we were in danger of being cut off by an incoming tide. Gullies deepened as the sea crept in at a pace. We fished and we played. Memories of this place have, with age, strengthened, with my age, strengthened. Residual memories of those physical experiences have surfaced, and places change too. The process of silting continues and the landmass expands. We see no evidence here of the submerged, petrified forest. Now we see a field of windmills. Press play. Fathom. The idea for this exhibition was to imagine the gallery walls were made of glass. I installed a strip of blue cyanotype running around the interior walls of the gallery. The strip of blue stands in place of the view of the distant sea, a blue horizon that we know lies beyond the gallery. The cyanotype is a historical process. Here it is used to record traces of unpicked lace fragments from underclothes, nightdresses, and trimmings. I imagined what it would be like to wear and feel these garments floating and sinking around me in the water. A lacy pattern of white waters, lace, a family heirloom kept in your bottom drawer, blue, the colour of distance. With this work, Fathom, I did not consciously set out to recall formative experiences of Liverpool, but the connection is strong. These blueprints were made at home, here in Exeter, in my kitchen. Each section is 2 meters long, the length of a sunbed. The source of the ultraviolet light from the sunbed is quite different to the normal sunlight. It's not only a constant and controllable light, but gives results that are soft and shadowy. So moving from Liverpool to Exmouth, my second location, here I'll introduce a set of research initiatives. In the slide, the text at the bottom reads, "Tidal streams across the entrance are violent." And that's an image of the old customs house. So during this period, my practice begins to be about being on the water, taking up canoeing and later sailing. It was the late 1990s, working out of Exeter School of Art. A small research group was formed called Site, Space, Location, Place, SSLP. Around this time, I initiated a project at the old customs house that stood on the Exmouth docks overlooking the pinch point of the estuary. Colleagues were invited to write a proposal to spend time using this space. There were no restrictions. All proposals were accepted. The only condition was that each individual took time to document and share their experience with an audience. Exmouth Documenta was the tongue-in-cheek title given to an archive that also formed an exhibition. From this inclusive beginning, the research group developed a strand called Littoral, which became the subject for a series of local and international exhibitions. Littoral ran in parallel to the move of the School of Art from Exeter to Plymouth, where the research took on a more interdisciplinary approach. Rising, falling, falling quickly was an early work made from a tourist boat, looking at and photographing the land from the sea. It was made for an exhibition as part of the Littoral project. Looking at the land from the sea became a conscious element of my practice. And so to Venice. Notes from the Venetian Lagoon is the umbrella title of several projects that I have been working on for the last 10 years. I began the project by trying to reach the parts of the lagoon I had previously only seen from tourist boats. Approaches were initially made in a canoe, then various small boats. And it isn't normally me that steers this boat. So there are two components to this project. One set of propositions are around what information can be conveyed by a photograph. The other addresses the nuances and inherent qualities of the medium of photography. The challenge has been to create a cohesive series of photographs that speak of and for the salt marshes of the Venice Lagoon, a contested environment. Leaving the boat and investigating the salt marshes, I took pre-coated paper to make a series of cyanotypes of plants of the lagoon, following in the footsteps of Anna Atkins, a botanist and illustrator who in the 19th century made the groundbreaking series of cyanotypes, photograms of algae flowers of the sea. Making these watery images in the landscape rather than in a studio or in the darkroom was both direct and performative experience. Control is lost, as for example, the wind blows, the unexpected happens. Working with sunlight, plants and water was a methodology used to evoke the spirit of the plant, to enable these plants that are unfamiliar to me to tell their own story, to delineate themselves. These cyanotypes are traces of plants made in situ. It's important to me that the plant here, the sea lavender, has been in contact with the paper. I began the project with close observation and collaborating with a marine biologist. Taking photographs from the boat was dependent on the tide. At low tide, when the banks were exposed, I looked through the camera across the threatened area of the salt marsh. In these camera-based photographs, it is not possible to identify all the plants. However, they form the connections and document the context of the salt marsh. I'm interested in the limitations of photography. This project was always going to be about how to place cameraless and camera-based images together, how to exhibit blueprints with black and white prints. Collected specimens from the lagoon were brought back home to the darkroom. The term objectograph is my own, and it references images made with a piece of equipment that is now obsolete. It lies somewhere between a camera and an enlarger. The objectographs have a quasi-scientific look. They are highly detailed, jewel-like negative prints. Then the series on the right, the combined image. The series of combined black and white photographs include an enlargement from a photographic negative and a photogram of the plant. These prints juxtapose a lens-based depiction and the evidence and trace of a plant specimen. The process involves chance, an aspect of darkroom practice I enjoy. The placing of the plant is made in the dark on a latent sheet of paper. How are we doing for time? So I just finish. I've got one more paragraph.
Yeah,
I haven't talked about the broader context of this project yet. In brief, the Venetian Lagoon is the largest wetland in the Mediterranean basin. Both the city of Venice and the lagoon are part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site established in 1987. The pressures of contemporary living have created a situation that has become urgent. As the local population dwindles, Venice is overrun with tourists and with the associated stress on the environment that this brings. UNESCO are threatening to put Venice on the in danger list. At this time, there seems to be no serious long-term planning to protect the environment from these activities. Venice and the lagoon are under threat, not only from tourism and the associated industries, but it faces the extra challenge resulting from the impact of climate change. I'm now looking forward to continuing this project post-COVID, as it seems that Venice has sort of changed. It's going to be quite interesting to return as the Venetians are taking on living in the city in a much more holistic way. Anyway, they were my 3 projects that I chose to talk to you about.
Great. Oh, I'm really interested in what you just said then. Can you just talk a bit about that now, just in case we have time for it, about Venice now?
About Venice?
Yeah, now how it's changed.
Well, it's been very interesting just through communication, because obviously I've been based in Exeter. My sense is that the people who inhabit Venice all the year round have actually taken a lot more control of their environment and begun to realise what the potential is to live there without so many tourists. I mean, obviously, a lot of people have lost their livelihood, but they've just done sort of very inventive things, and I think become quite close again to their environment, which will be something that I'll be interested in finding out more about.
Yeah. Okay.
Some of the impact on the lagoon is from the local people. You know, they often trash it. It's their playground. So they're fishing it and doing all sorts, as well as then all the other impacts from tourism. And it's complex.
Yeah.
Anna, it's Anna here, and I hope that you have the share screen facility and are co-host.
I hope so too.
Yes, you are, Anna. You're a co-host.
Welcome,
Okay.
good child.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And what a pity, Liz. I would have loved to have seen your work. But I will do. I will do. Does anybody recognize this expression, time water? It's the literal translation of the Norwegian word for tide. And it made me think of those ceramic water clocks used in 4000 BC by the Chinese, and then by the Babylonians and the Egyptians in the 16th century BC. And they were translated into a sound clock, first documented in Europe in the 8th century. But I'm not so much about numbers as about images, both photography and poetry. And my interest in tides so far has been in what they leave behind, and the sand etchings left by the tides, receding tides, and all the wonderful images that they leave. And then the seaweed, this Ulva lactuca, which is actually lettuce, sea lettuce, I picked up in Paynton Harbour, stretched it over a piece of perspex and then backlit it. And in it, I found all sorts of little animals, all forming their own little mini ecosystems in the seaweed. I have then also, like Liz, I've been doing cyanotypes inspired by the seaweed cyanotypes of Anna Atkins way back in the 19th century, and more recently by Megan Riepenhoff in the States. This one on the right is 1.2 meters long, as is the one on the left. But you can see traces in here of the effects of salt on the cyanotypes. The middle image is of a Epheus serratus, which has the same sort of brown bits. And Megan, if you have a chance to see Megan Riepenhoff's work, then you'll be absolutely delighted by it. I carried on doing different cyanotypes on different types of the many, many seaweeds that you find here on the coast. and eventually, and I can do it on paper or cloth. I've done it on cotton and silk. And you can see that I use chemicals. Anybody who uses science apps uses chemicals that I was releasing into the environment. So I decided to go back to photography and got different types. And I've got this brown tuning fork weed. I got it more for the name than anything else. I wonder what tuning fork is in Latin, but I guess I'll find out one day. I love using my microscope lens on my phone, and this one here is of Irish moss on that tuning fork weed, and this one on the right is just the Irish moss, sorry. And two guesses, this is a stone because it's also left on the beach. Oops. Oh dear. Oh. Sorry. There. I also like to photograph shells. This is an oyster shell, which has terrific landscapes all of its own and other little crevices and nooks and crannies where other animals can also share. And I was speaking to a friend recently about my seaweed photographs, and he was working at Living Coast at the time before it closed. And he told me about the flowering seagrasses that are interspersed all over in little reserves all around Tor Bay, where we live. And in the summer, I intend to go subtidal to photograph the flowers and to record whatever's going on down there, because I was inspired by Norwegian artists Singer Liden and Jana Windren with their recordings of very, very different recordings of what goes on under the sea. Finally, I'd like to share a poem I wrote, which was inspired by some films that I took at high tide in Tor Bay. And the poem is also a metaphor, can be seen as a metaphor for what we've experienced in COVID. Spume eddies in the storm. Above the sea, worried thoughts twirl and rise over convulsing waves, spume-like. Their strength, their content, their being quickened. Below the waves, sea grasses flower free in a fertile present. They dance to a fresh, tide-fed, ocean-grooved music. Along the shore, smithereens of fine shells in these recurrent storms sculpt clear, with moon and strong winds, new sandstone profiles. And I've left here links to some of the people that I've mentioned, whose work I've mentioned. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Very fine work, beautiful.
Thank you.
I was just going to ask if anybody had any questions for Anna before we have a little break. We're going to just scan through to see if anyone's...
Alicia has had her hand up. I don't know if it's a current hand.
Yes, I've asked her. Not heard.
Anna, has the work emerged through lockdown, or was it something you were doing before that?
I started about 2 weeks ago. Okay. Sorry, 2 months ago, not 2 weeks. 2 years. Let me get that right. 2 years ago, because I've been doing an awful lot more walking recently than I did before, and when you've got time to walk along the beach, you tend to take in a lot more that is there. You notice a lot more, and I just love the variety of seaweed. Somebody's asked me for those links again. Shall I just I'll just get them up. Oh, right.
We can add these to the website later on. But
okay, I'll put them in the chat.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Anna.
Okay.
Fantastic. Okay.
Ask if you can go back to the full screen. I've already asked. Haley.
Great. Okay. So I think.
Shall I say no?
I think a good a little pause might be what everybody needs right now.
I'm going to need to share my screen.
It should be set up for you already.
Yeah, you have permission to do that.
Share screen. Okay. Should I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Share screen. Hi, I'm Marlene Kreitz, and I'm speaking to you from Muktuhunguk, which is the Mi'kmaq name for the island of Newfoundland. It's the name in the upper left-hand corner, starting with the letter K. The rest of the map indicates Mi'kmaq place names. Now in North America, it's customary to start public events with a land acknowledgement to recognize the indigenous people who were here before the settlers. I'm a descendant of settlers from England, but I also think of them as refugees because they were part of the poor landless class in Britain. They came to Newfoundland, pronounced as Newfoundland in Britain, I believe, in the early 1800s and became poor fishermen instead. Newfoundland, there it is there, is the closest point in North America to Europe. So European explorers arrived on the island before they arrived on the continent itself. The first known Europeans to have set foot on North America were the Norse, aka Vikings, and they called the island Vinland. And you've probably heard of the Vinland sagas that were written about Leif Erikson, and who was the son of Eric the Red. They established a settlement on the tip of the northern peninsula around 1,000 years ago, but they abandoned it after only a couple of years. It's called Lanso Meadows now. The site wasn't found by archaeologists until 1960, and it's now a Canadian National Historic Site. No Europeans came for the next 4 centuries until Basque whalers and Portuguese fishermen came in the 15th century because of the abundance of cod on the Grand Banks. In fact, I live in a town called Portugal Cove because Portuguese landed and cured their fish here at one time. The province also includes Labrador, that's this section up here, which is the homeland of the Innu and the Inuit. The province extends in the north from the same latitude as the southern tip of Greenland in the south to southern France. Our population in this vast territory is only 500,000 people, roughly the population of the city of Bristol. This is a nautical chart of Conception Bay. I live here, right there in Portugal Cove, where the local time now is 9:30 in the morning, and the high tide is occurring right now in Conception Bay. And I'll just mention, this is Bell Island that will appear a bit later in my talk. When I read about this high water event, I was just planning to show you some pictures of ice in the bay and tell you some of the terms in the local Newfoundland dialect for various formations of sea ice. But that led me to icebergs. And that led me to glaciers in Greenland, which led me to the decline of the cod stocks on the Grand Banks, which led me to the cod moratorium, which led me to seals and polar bears. So I'm going to touch on all those things and tell you how the whole works is intertwined with global warming. And I even managed to fit in some beer and spirits into the next 15 minutes. This is a chart of sea ice in the Canadian Arctic, as well as off the coast of Labrador, there on March 10th. There are no roads into the communities in northern Labrador along the coast there. Access is only by little propeller planes or by sea. When the Labrador Sea freezes, the ice becomes the highway. Travel was traditionally over the ice by dog sled, and now it's mostly by snowmobile. This year, it was the warmest January and February on record in northern Labrador, and the ice set 5 weeks later and was thinner. Scientists say northern Labrador is losing its ice faster than anywhere in the world. Oops, it's not advancing. Ooh. What's going on? My screen's not advancing. Shoot. The next slide is the chart of the sea ice today. If I could get it. Why can't I get it? Anyone got any help?
Does it help to sort of press escape and then come back in again somehow?
Oh, escape's not even working. Oh man. I went through all this morning and it was fine.
Very hard to suggest anything helpful because we can't really quite see what.
There. Okay.
Oh, there we go. Excellent.
Sorry. Thank you. I got to go back. Okay. This is the sea ice today. As you can see, over the past 3 weeks, it has moved further south down the coast towards the island. Oh, phew. There are two ways that we get ice in Conception Bay. One way is that ice which formed in the Arctic moves down the east coast of Canada on the Labrador Current, and it takes the same route as the Norse did 1,000 years ago. Depending on the direction of the wind in relation to the tides, it can be driven into Conception Bay and usually arrives in March or April. This is called drift ice. The second way that we get ice in Conception Bay is when the winter is cold enough and ice forms in the bay itself. This is called local ice or bay ice. This is becoming more and more rare because of global warming. I'm going to start with some images of local ice in Conception Bay. In 2014, the winter was so cold that by March, Conception Bay froze for the first time in decades. So these are some of the various formations that I saw and the local terms. An ice field in loose pieces is described as slackening. Oh, don't tell me it's doing this again. How did I get out of it before? Oh, all right. Pancake ice is thin sheets of ice that do not impede navigation. Scattering ice is an ice field breaking into fragments and dispersing. Sish is fine granulated ice floating on the surface of the sea. Sish is also used to describe ice scum around the shore. A head lead is an open stretch of water in ice field, usually in front of a ship. Slob or slobby ice is densely packed ice fragments that are unsafe to walk on. Ice broken into a mixture of chunks and slush is said to be crushed all to a pummie. And way ice is loose ice that is easy to navigate. A few years ago, I led a project with local school children. I asked them to interview an elder in the community about their memories of growing up here. One of the elders said, quote, "The winters were much colder back then, and some farmers would bring vegetables across the ice using a horse and sleigh to Bell Island," unquote. I found this amazing, that the salt water in the bay could have frozen solid enough to support a horse and sleigh loaded with food. The loss of ice is resulting in the loss of local terms for it because they are not being used or heard. Some of the local terms for ice and snow actually came from 17th century Wessex, brought to Newfoundland with the settlers. My own Newfoundland ancestors were from Dorset and Devon. But when settlers arrived here, they had to come up with new words to describe ice conditions they had never experienced before. The loss of local linguistic complexity is a result of major changes in Newfoundland and Labrador, particularly the decline of the fishery as an occupation. People are simply not spending as much time outside or on the water as they did. Oh, for heaven's sakes. As you may know, there's been a moratorium on the cod fishery here since 1992. At that time, it was the largest labor layoff in Canadian history. It affected 38,000 people. This is such a nuisance, isn't it? Okay. It directly affected not only the fish harvesters, but also the fish plant workers, truckers, and many other related businesses. That was close to 30 years ago, and the cod stocks do not seem to be rebounding. I live in the woods up here, just above the harbor in Portugal Cove. I took this picture of the harbor in April 2017, when heavy ice from the Arctic was driven by winds and tides into Conception Bay. Remember, when it's ice from the Arctic, it's called drift ice. The ice was so heavy that a Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker had to open it up for the local ferry to Bell Island, where over 2,000 people live. You wouldn't see a horse and sleigh bringing food across the bay nowadays. The ferry is an essential service because many people living on Bell Island use the ferry to commute to work. This ice from the Arctic in 2017 brought seals into the bay. These dark spots that you see are seals. They had traveled south on the ice pans. When there are seals present, the ice is called a seal meadow. And I just took that picture from the shore of one of the seals out on the ice. Sometimes even a hungry polar bear arrives, having traveled all the way down from the Arctic on a floating ice pan. And we get warnings about this because the polar bears are starving and they're very aggressive. And if they're lucky, they will be tranquilized and airlifted back up north. Icebergs also arrive off the coast of Newfoundland. I took the next pictures in May of 2017 in a boat off Fogo Island, which is a smaller island off the northeast coast of Newfoundland. It's where my Newfoundland ancestors from Wessex settled in the early 1800s. Just to explain the difference between icebergs and ice pans, the ice pans are created when the surface of the sea itself freezes, which is why they're flat. But icebergs are from glaciers off Greenland's west coast. The glaciers form on land by snow building up over thousands of years. Each layer of snow compresses those layers below until glacial ice forms up to a mile high. These glaciers are the remnants of the last ice age, and the ice is calculated to be up to 25,000 years old. The icebergs break off from the edges of the glaciers and slip into the ocean. Most start their journey about a year before they arrive off our coast. And what we see above water is only 1/7 its actual size. So you have to try to imagine 7 times more ice under the surface of the ocean. Like the flat ice pans and the Norse 1,000 years ago, the icebergs are brought south on the Labrador Current and arrive here in the spring. There is a local vocabulary for icebergs too, depending on their size and shape. Some of the terms include growlers, rollers, clumpers, and bergy bits. These waters are called Iceberg Alley because of the number of icebergs that pass by. And that, of course, is what happened to the Titanic on its major voyage in 1912 from Southampton to New York. It hit an iceberg about 375 miles south of Newfoundland. The wireless operator at Cape Race received the distress call and relayed telegraphs to New York City.
You've got 2 minutes, Marlene.
That'll just do me. In the past 30 years, the loss of ice on the Greenland glacial ice sheet has increased 6 times, leading to a rise in sea level. So there is both a beauty and a terror in seeing these icebergs. The water from icebergs is considered to be the purest water in the world. So in Newfoundland, they now harvest icebergs, and companies are making gin and vodka and beer using water from the icebergs. So a book was published covering the 80 terms I found in the local Newfoundland dialect for ice and snow. It includes my photographs and definitions of the terms. And if you're interested in buying a copy, please contact me. I will offer it to friends of art.earth for half price.
It's amazing and cool.
That's the title of the video that is linked on the schedule for today. Under my name, there's a link to the video I took from Portugal Cove to Bell Island, just looking at the different conditions of sea ice. It's just one shot with no edits.
Thank you so much. And I heartily recommend watching the video. It's absolutely beautiful.